with that, I'll turn the time over to Christian Heimburger from this volume, and he'll introduce everybody else, and we'll have a couple of speakers, and then everybody can ask questions to any of the editors that are here. We'll kind of do a group answer session. So with that, I'll turn it over to you, and thanks for being here.
Thank you. I better turn mine off too, just in case my bookie calls. So I don't want to have it happen. Well, thank you everybody for being here. Is my voice loud enough that you can hear me?
Yes.
Okay, I'm using the professor voice tonight. It's a great pleasure to be back here at Benchmark Books, and I want to thank Chris for inviting us. My name is Christian Heimburger, and I'm the lead historian on Documents Volume 13. I'd also like to introduce my distinguished colleague, co-presenter here today, Jeffrey Mahas. Both of us have been working at the JSP now for about 10 years. I worked on Documents Volume 5 and 9. Jeffrey was Documents Volume 6, 11, and A1, right?
Yeah.
Okay. I also had the privilege of leading a whole team of talented historians on the volume in addition to Jeffrey, so I want to quickly acknowledge the four gentlemen who contributed their talents to this volume. So we have Brent Rogers in the back, Chase Kirkham in the back, Matt McBride here in the middle, and then Mason Allred, who is probably on a beach someplace in Hawaii surfing a gnarly wave right now. I also want to acknowledge the gifted team of production editors, including our lead editor, Angie Thompson, who helped shape and polish this volume. Many of us devoted 3 years of our lives to this book, and so Jeffrey and I are pleased to represent that team tonight. So we're going to share with you 3 vignettes from this volume. It's a very thick, you've already picked it up and hefted it, it's heavy and a lot of things are in there, but we're going to share 3 vignettes from that volume tonight. And I've named this first vignette, The Anti-Mormons Awaken. So after years of struggling to build a Zion community in New York, Ohio, and Missouri, the Latter-day Saints in Western Illinois and the Eastern United States, the migrants from the United States and England had poured into Nauvoo and its surrounding towns. They'd erected hundreds of buildings and businesses and houses on the flats adjacent to the Mississippi River and on the bluff to the east. Church members continued to build the Nauvoo Mansion and, most importantly, the Nauvoo Temple. And thanks to church members' contribution of money and goods and labor, the edifice had a basement, had a first-story floor, and walls as high as the arches of the first tier of windows all around by late 1843. Joseph sometimes preached from its unfinished walls, where he urged the saints to continue to provide the money and the raw materials and physical labor necessary to finish this sacred edifice, promising them that God would fill it with power. With prosperity and growth, however, came tension between the Latter-day Saints and their neighbors in Western Illinois. 2 events occurred in August actually, of 1843 that significantly exacerbated those tensions. So on August 7th, the citizens of Hancock County went to the polling stations to vote in the Illinois congressional election. Latter-day Saints composed a majority of the voters in the newly created 6th congressional district, and as you can imagine, both the Whigs and the Democrats were courting their vote. The Whigs nominated Cyrus Walker, who was a lawyer and a friend of Joseph Smith, in an attempt to court the Latter-day Saint vote. Smith, of course, pledged to vote for Walker, but in a discourse given the day before the election, he publicly endorsed a revelation received by his brother Hiram, indicating that church members should vote for a Democrat, Joseph P. Hodge. Hodge went on to win the election by a 3/4 majority. And this angered the local Whigs, who publicly declared that, quote, "a revelation from heaven turned a majority against us." One Whig newspaper explicitly surmised that, quote, "the Mormons in the 6th district were instructed to vote for Hodge." So the perception that the Latter-day Saints would vote en masse according to the whims of their leaders greatly disturbed and angered many local Illinois residents. Now, in addition to the election results, there was a perception by some in Illinois and Missouri that Joseph Smith had no regard for the law. Between June of 1841 and July of 1843, Joseph thrice foiled attempts by the state of Missouri to extradite him back to that state to face charges stemming from the 1838 Missouri War. Joseph's repeated use of a legal procedure called habeas corpus caused some Illinois residents to believe that he was somehow manipulating the law to avoid justice. Additionally, in early August, Joseph Smith got into a violent altercation with Hancock County tax collector Walter Bagby. And I'm not going to go into the details about that, what led to this altercation, but suffice it to say that it only reinforced the views of those who believed that Smith had no regard for the law or for the civil officers that were trying to enforce it. After this particular episode, Bagby became a staunch enemy of Joseph Smith and was really determined to abase the Latter-day Saint leader. And as I was researching this subject a few years back, I came across a small collection of papers that were related to Walter Bagby. And shortly after his fight with Joseph, Bagby wrote a little letter to his brother, Charles Bagby, and he informed him that though he had previously committed to visit his brother in Kentucky, he felt, quote, unwilling to leave the country now until I see the arrogance of that abomination in human shape, Joseph Smith, humbled low in the dust. So pretty strong words there from Walter Bagby. So the perceptions that Joseph Smith was unwilling to submit to the ordinary constraints of law, that he abused the power of habeas corpus during previous extradition attempts, and that he wielded undue political influence, this all contributed to a growing tide of resentment on the part of Walter Bagby and other residents of Hancock County. So in mid-August of 1843, this opposition coalesced into an organization of a group of citizens who called themselves the Anti-Mormon Party, or Anti-Mormons. So on August 19th, approximately 200 citizens attended what they referred to as a great meeting of anti-Mormons in an effort to facilitate Smith's extradition to Missouri. And when they gathered again on the 6th of September, the self-proclaimed Anti-Mormon Party, which included Walter Bagby, as I mentioned before, it included former Warsaw Signal editor Thomas Sharp, and Hancock County Militia Colonel Levi Williams, they unanimously adopted a series of resolutions and charged Joseph Smith with, quote, a most shameless disregard for all the forms and restraints of law. They resolved that if the governor of Illinois would, quote, not surrender Joe Smith on the requisition of the governor of Missouri, they would call in aid from other counties and other states to assist them in delivering him up. So the committee members further declared that they believed that their lives were threatened by the Latter-day Saints and that they would, quote, avenge any blood that might be shed with violence. And then in language that very much echoed other radical political movements and other vigilantes, such as the resolutions of the citizens of Jackson County a decade earlier, the Anti-Mormon Party resolved to resist any and all future wrongs imposed by the Latter-day Saints, quote, peaceably if we can, but forcibly if we must. So the Anti-Mormon Party's pronouncements, particularly that they would actively assist the state of Missouri and other Missouri officials in extraditing Joseph Smith, really rekindled old fears of mob violence and ushered in a heightened state of anxiety in Nauvoo. In mid-August, Joseph received a message from an attorney, Shepard Patrick, that enclosed another letter from a friend of his who lived in Independence, Missouri. In this letter, Patrick's friend chastised him for defending Joseph Smith in June of 1843 and informed him that, quote, if Illinois by her own authority cannot capture the prophet, it will be but a small matter to raise volunteers enough here to raise the city of Nauvoo to the ground. So Joseph went on to forward that correspondence to Illinois Governor Ford, noting that the Latter-day Saints did not really fear an armed incursion into Nauvoo, and that they stood ready to defend the honor of the governor and the state when any danger actually threatens. In the ensuing months, Smith corresponded regularly with Governor Ford. So we have a lot of those letters exchanged between Governor Ford and Joseph Smith in this volume. And he tried to keep the governor abreast of the political threats from Missouri and Illinois, who the people of whom Joseph referred to them as a mobocratic insurrection. So if you when you open this volume, you'll see that we feature a discourse in which Joseph discussed the August election and his brother's revelation. That's in this volume. We also feature 6 letters between Joseph Smith and Governor Ford that discuss the various threats from the anti-Mormon party in the state of Missouri. The rise of the anti-Mormon party and the nascent opposition to plural marriage by William Law and others really laid the foundation for the explosive conflict that would erupt in 1844 and that would eventually culminate in the murder of Joseph and Hiram Smith. Okay, so vignette number 2, I call this one Joseph Smith in the Last Crusade for Justice. So for nearly 10 years, Joseph Smith and other leaders had unsuccessfully petitioned the state and federal authorities for redress for the destruction of property and the loss of life that the Latter-day Saints endured in Missouri between 1833 and 1839. And so when church leaders petitioned Congress in early 1840, for example, the Senate Committee on the Judiciary ruled that the federal government had no jurisdiction over the case whatsoever, and that, quote, the petitioners must seek relief in the courts of judicature of the state of Missouri or of the United States. And so the Latter-day Saints were very understandably frustrated by this rationale. And in October of 1843, Times and Seasons editor John Taylor wrote this. He said, "We have memorialized Congress, but they have turned a deaf ear to our supplication and referred us again to the state and justice," you can probably insert sarcasm there, the justice of Missouri. So during the late fall and early winter of 1843, Joseph Smith and other church leaders decide to renew their efforts to petition the federal government for reparations by drafting 2 additional memorials to Congress. Similar to the other memorials that they had given to Congress previously, the November 1843 memorial, which was authored by Latter-day Saint supporter Colonel John Frierson, implored federal officials to quote, grant such relief as the Constitution and laws you may have power to give. Myself and the other editors of Documents Volume 13 elected not to feature this memorial in our volume, or at least in the print volume, because of the 3,419 signatures that accompanied it. In 1843, this memorial, which is often known as the Scroll Petition, was 50 feet long. So for us, that would have meant devoting a considerable amount of space in the volume to this one petition alone and all the many, many signatures. But have no fear, we are going to post this document with annotation online on our website, so everybody will have access to it. It has tons of signatures, all original signatures. So if you might have an ancestor or something, you can go on and look at it on our website and see. But it's quite fascinating. So this is one of the petitions that they did. As part of a broader strategy of redress, church leaders also published appeals addressed to the citizenry of several eastern states, and they wrote 5 letters to potential presidential candidates during the fall of 1843. So in November, Joseph Smith authorized W.W. Phelps, Parley P. Pratt, Sidney Rigdon, and others to write to the citizens in their home states to try to sway public opinion about the Latter-day Saints' grievances and the administration of justice. The most well-known of these addresses is probably General Joseph Smith's appeal to the Green Mountain Boys, which was a militia unit in Vermont. And this, of course, was the state from which Joseph came from, right? He was born in Vermont. And this petition, or this appeal, was drafted by Phelps and edited and approved by Joseph Smith. And it was likely addressed to the Green Mountain Boys to remind the citizens of Vermont of their legacy as patriots who championed property rights and liberty. The Green Mountain Boys, and I normally would have a slideshow here and you could see pictures of the Green Mountain Boys, but they were members of a grassroots militia group led by Ethan Allen, who you're probably familiar with, right, during the American Revolution. And in the 1770s, they tried to protect settlers' rights to land that was claimed by both New York and New Hampshire. And then, of course, the militia fought in the Revolutionary War. So this was who Joseph was writing it to, right? The Green Mountain Boys, trying to appeal to them. So in November, Joseph Smith and church leaders also wrote letters to 5 political candidates, like I mentioned before, for the presidency to, quote, ascertain what their course would be towards the Saints if they were elected in 1844. So this distinguished list of candidates included former Vice President John C. Calhoun, two-time presidential hopeful Henry Clay, and former Secretary of War Lewis Cass. So in Documents Volume 13, we feature the only original copy of the letter that is extant, which was handwritten by Willard Richards and is today housed in the archives of Clemson University in South Carolina. So we feature that letter, and then we feature three of the responses. Three of the people wrote back in their own hand. And we feature all three of these letters, which, so the first one was Whig candidate Henry Clay. He was the first to respond in November. Clay was very much favored by Joseph Smith, who had declared himself a Clay man just 2 months earlier. And Clay wrote back and informed Joseph Smith that while he sympathized with the Latter-day Saints' sufferings under justice, he could, quote, enter into no engagements, make no promises, give no pledges of any particular portion of the people of the United States. In early December, Democrat John C. Calhoun replied, and he reiterated the Senate's previous position when he told Smith that the Latter-day Saint case did not, quote, come within the jurisdiction of the federal government, which is one of limited and specific powers. You may recall from your history books that Calhoun was a vocal proponent of states' rights. And while serving as vice president in 1828, Calhoun argued that a state had the power to actually nullify any act of the federal government that it considered unconstitutional. And this doctrine was later referred to as nullification. So Calhoun's ideas about states' rights were partly shaped by the South's commitment to protect the institution of slavery. In contrast, Joseph Smith and the Latter-day Saints maintained that the state of Missouri failed to protect their individual rights during the 1830s, and they felt like the federal government had the greater potential and even the responsibility to protect the liberty and rights of the nation's citizens. So Democrat Lewis Cass was the last to reply, and in his letter he told Joseph Smith that he didn't think that the president had the power to award redress when the state of Missouri and Congress had expressly rejected it. As you can imagine, they were very frustrated by this. And as a result, Joseph Smith instructed W.W. Phelps to respond to Cass and Calhoun in late December and to, quote, show them the folly of keeping people out of their right and that there was power in government to redress wrongs. The letter was published in the Times and Season, and as you can imagine, was full of a lot of, how do I say, like invective and bitterness. The federal government's unwillingness to award redress and the indifference of the presidential candidates were some of the reasons why in January of 1844 the Quorum of the 12 Apostles suggested that Joseph Smith himself run for president. And I would love to talk about that, talk about Joseph Smith's presidential platform and candidacy, but I'm afraid that is a subject for the next volume of the Joseph Smith Papers, Documents Volume 14. So stay tuned for that coming out next year. All right, so we'll move on to vignette number 3 about the mysterious case of the Avery kidnappings, and Geoffrey is going to take us home on that one.
Good evening. So I think it's about a third, or is it 2/3? It's a third, right? Mm-hmm. About a third of all of the documents in Documents Volume 13 of the Joseph Smith Papers are connected with a specific incident involving the kidnapping of a Latter-day Saint father and son. And so I'm going to try and walk you through some of this and talk about its significance and importance. Because I think the Avery kidnappings are best seen as a prelude to Joseph Smith's murder that happens, of course, 6 months later in June of 1844. From this time on, you have basically a cycle of reaction and overreaction on the part of Latter-day Saints and the anti-Mormon party that Christians talked about, where they just are, one party will act, the other party will overreact, which will lead to another overreaction, and it just keeps building and snowballing until you get to Carthage jail in June of 1844. But this is, I think, kind of the start where the ball gets rolling. It all starts when Mark Childs, the son of a Latter-day Saint, is caught stealing horses in Missouri. He was also working with Ebenezer Richardson, another Latter-day Saint. Now, ever since the Mormon War in 1838, you had a small group of Latter-day Saints who believed they were justified in stealing, particularly in stealing from Missourians. Their attitude seemed to have been, the world has taken everything away from us, we're justified in taking a little away from you. This is publicly condemned by Joseph, Hiram, Brigham Young, and others, but the practice continues. So after Childs is captured, he appears to make a deal with his captors in Missouri, saying that he will lead them to a gang of Mormon horse thieves if they let him go. And they agree. And so Childs, to get the blame off of him, says you're really looking for this father and son, Daniel and Philander Avery, in Hancock County. So on the 12th of November, 1843, Philander Avery is tricked to traveling to Warsaw. Once he arrives at Warsaw, he's greeted by a mob of Missourians who grab him, take him across the Mississippi River, and there Ebenezer Richardson pulls out a large Bowie knife and says, "You're about to sign a confession or I'm going to kill you." Philander Avery at that point signs the confession where he says that in June of 1840, he, his father, and 2 other Latter-day Saints had stolen 2 horses and a colt from a Joseph McCoy in Missouri. Philander signed this confession at the point of a knife before a justice of the peace, who then sent Philander to jail to await trial. Now, this was exactly the kind of opportunity the anti-Mormon party had been waiting for. They had formed, as Christians said, that they are willing, peaceably if they can, forcibly if they must, to try and tackle what they saw as Mormon outrages in the county. And now here they have a Latter-day Saint that's been accused of stealing horses. And so Levi Williams, a colonel in the Hancock County, Missouri, assembles a mob, and on the 2nd of December, 1843, they seize Daniel Avery at his home in central Hancock County, tie him up on a horse, and carry him to the Missouri River, where he's again taken across the river to the same justice of the peace, and bound for jail. The entire time Avery was doing this, he was yelling at the top of his lungs and screaming, saying he was being kidnapped, he's demanding a trial, demanding a hearing, demanding justice, but to no avail. Now, there's several issues with the Avery kidnappings. Obviously, they're kidnappings. Ironically, for the anti-Mormon party, claiming that they're out to try and support the rule of law, they're willing to break the law to try and support the law, which is a common thing you see with 19th century vigilantes. They believe that their opponents, uniformly, whoever they are, gamblers, Mormons, Catholics, free blacks, whoever they are, their argument is they're so bad we need to break the law to preserve the law, which is what they're doing here. Another technical problem here is also the alleged horse thefts happened past the statute of limitations. It was illegal to prosecute, even if the Averys had stolen the horses, it would have been illegal to prosecute them at this date, a fact which the Missouri courts got around by changing the date on the indictment to make it legal for them to prosecute the Averys. By the 5th of November, a few days later, news of the kidnappings arrived in Nauvoo, and it lit off a hornet's nest in the city. Immediately, Joseph and the Saints start worrying. If they can take these 2 random Latter-day Saints, they could come for me next. They could come for Joseph. There's nothing stopping them from grabbing me at the point of a knife or point of a gun and taking me back across the river to Missouri. So on the 8th of December, 1843, you get the first chain of a series of Mormon reactions in this reaction over reaction chain. Early in the morning, Joseph starts the process to muster the Nauvoo Legion to defend the city. He also calls for a special session of the Nauvoo City Council where, at Joseph's insistence, they pass, quote, an extra ordinance for the extra case of Joseph Smith. And I'm going to read some segments of this because it's spectacular. Be it ordained by the City Council of the City of Nauvoo, according to the intent and meaning of the Charter for the benefit and convenience of Nauvoo, that hereafter if any person or persons shall come with process, demand, or requisition founded upon the aforesaid Missouri difficulties to arrest said Joseph Smith, he or they so offending shall be subject to be arrested by any officer of the city with or without process, and tried by the municipal court upon testimony, and if found guilty, sentenced to imprisonment in the city prison for life, which a convict or convicts can only be pardoned by the governor with the consent of the mayor of said city. And then they say, what we say about Joseph applies to everyone in Nauvoo. If anyone tries to arrest someone in Nauvoo on Missouri difficulties, we will imprison them for life. And if you'd like to point out to them, but wait, I thought life imprisonment could only happen with a felony, which the U.S. Constitution says can only happen with indictment brought by a grand jury, the third section of the ordinance granted Nauvoo the right to create grand juries. This is the first in a series of overreactions by Joseph Smith and the city council. On the 12th of December, for example, a few days later, they pass an ordinance to create a police force of 40 men. Now that may seem like a minor deal for you, but this is actually one of the first police forces in the United States. Major cities like Boston, New York, and Philadelphia had experimented with police forces, but had determined they were far too costly. They could rely on night watchmen and constables, but to keep a police force night and day, there was no way these cities could afford this at this time. And Nauvoo finds out pretty quickly they can't pay their police either. It's also exceptionally large for a 19th century police force. So this is a major deal if you look at it in the context of American policing. On the 21st of December, a few weeks later, they pass another ordinance, this time saying that no one can be arrested in Nauvoo, period, without Joseph Smith's permission. If Joseph Smith gives permission, they can be arrested. That same day, they also approve a memorial to Congress asking for Nauvoo to be declared that it will have all the rights and powers of a territory of the United States, and that Joseph can call on the United States Army if necessary to defend the city from mobbers or invasion. As you can imagine, and again, the chain and cycle of reaction over reaction, if you're already an anti-Mormon convinced that Joseph doesn't have any regard to the law, you're going to see these ordinances and immediately see we're absolutely right. We are 100% correct. The Latter-day Saints have no regard for the law. We need to do something. In addition to these ordinances, they also make an attempt to strike back legally. There are attempts to arrest John C. Elliott and Levi Williams, two of the members of the mob who had kidnapped Daniel Avery. They succeed in arresting Elliott, and Elliott is brought to Nauvoo for trial. But the attempt to arrest Levi Williams, they end up putting a stop to that because as the posse from Nauvoo travels to meet them, the anti-Mormons start arming themselves with rifles, and about 100 anti-Mormons assemble to prevent the arrest of their leader, Levi Williams. And at this point, I think Joseph realizes that the tensions have escalated too much and it's time to calm things down. So Joseph forgives Elliott from some of the charges facing him in Nauvoo and issues orders for the posse to stop their attempts to arrest Levi Williams. In a meeting before the Nauvoo Legion, he tells them to hold themselves in ready at a moment's warning, but says it was best not to go down again at present. Let the mob abide there for a public disgrace, and when the mob has dispersed, then our men could go down and bring Colonel Levi Williams without trouble. And at this point, Joseph seems to adopt a more pacifistic stance, saying, let's try to patch things over, let's try to cool things down from this fever pitch. And for the Averys, this works. At some point in time, we don't know when, sometime in December, Philander Avery was able to escape prison. And on December 25th, Christmas Day, Daniel Avery was finally released from Missouri prison. Many Latter-day Saints believed that the kidnapping of Daniel and Philander Avery was all just a ruse to try and get church leaders to come to Missouri to testify on his behalf. For example, the sheriff or the deputy sheriff of the county in Missouri writes to Clayton, and it's a very you'd almost say it's a blackmail letter, because it's like, it'd sure be a shame if Daniel Avery had to stay in prison because none of you church leaders are going to come to testify for him. We'd really love to have you come to Missouri and testify. And when the Latter-day Saints respond and say, no, according to the laws of Missouri, you have the power to deputize a justice of the peace and take testimony here, we'll gladly testify here and submit it to your trial, there's no further attempt, and immediately thereafter, Daniel Avery is released. In the short term, this looks like it's going to end some of the tension in the region. Joseph, for example, when he learns of Daniel Avery's release, which happens the same day that Porter Rockwell returns to Nauvoo after his long imprisonment in Missouri, rejoices in his journal, saying, "Missouri was again rid of the brethren." Of course, there were some continued anti-Mormon threats. Levi Williams continued to visit outlying settlements, threatening that if they didn't surrender their weapons, they would take them by force. But in general, it seems like Joseph hopes that this moment's going to be a time where we can relieve the tension that's been growing between us and the anti-Mormons. And that's the context when on the 29th of December, 1843, Joseph swears in the Nauvoo police force. I think this is one of Joseph's least well understood discourses, because in the context of the Avery kidnappings, this is often seen as a very hot-headed discourse, and I actually think it's the opposite. So, for example, in swearing in the police force, Joseph tells them, "We will be at peace with all men so long as they will let us alone. This shall be the motto of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints from this time forth in relation to Missouri. Let them alone." And what's possibly the best Joseph Smith quote of all time, "Let us keep cool as a cucumber in a frosty morning. Say nothing about Missouri. Soft words will turn away wrath." It's in this context Joseph trying to say, let's calm things down. We're going to be at peace. We're not going to be aggressors. That he makes a very grievous error. In trying to downplay the threat of the anti-Mormons, who are out there and threatening, they're out there still threatening Latter-day Saints, but Joseph's trying to downplay their threats. He says, "I think my life is in more danger of some little doughhead of a fool in the city than from all the voluntary," it's a made-up word anyway, "of enemies abroad. And if I can escape the hands of an assassin, I can live as might Caesar have lived if it had not been for a Brutus. I have had pretended friends who have betrayed me, as I am informed." Now, in the context of this discourse, this is Joseph saying, we don't need to worry about the anti-Mormons. We don't need to worry about the Missourians. Heck, I'm more worried about some traitor in the city than I am worried about what our enemies are going to do. But meanwhile, you've had growing dissent brewing in the city. There'd been a break between Joseph and William Law over plural marriage and other issues that had been growing and festering for several months. And in the context of that tension, the police leave this, and the police don't leave this meeting thinking, boy, we're out to try and keep the peace. We're out to decrease tensions. We're out to try and make things cheery between us and the anti-Mormons. The police leave this discourse and think, who is the traitor, and how can I find them? And their answer becomes, they think it's William Law or William Marks. And so within days of Joseph delivering this discourse, you have the explosive blow-up and the schism between William Law and Joseph Smith. And again, the cycle of reaction and overreaction will now continue on through June. And the one thing I'd just like to say in conclusion here is it's important to remember, I think it's very clear Joseph and the Latter-day Saints overreact to the Avery kidnappings. But the threats that they faced were real. For example, at one point in time, Joseph says in regard to John C. Eliot, after Eliot's arrested for kidnapping Daniel Avery, Joseph charges Eliot with having threatened his life, saying that he believes that Eliot is conspiring with others to try and murder Joseph. If you're looking at this immediate context, Joseph's charge seems almost paranoid and seems, again, like another overreaction. But I think it's important to remember that 6 months later, Eliot was one of the men who pulled the trigger at Carthage jail. And so Eliot was planning to murder Joseph. The threats that the Latter-day Saints were facing were real, and their overreactions may have accelerated or increased the tensions in the community, but the threats of death and violence were real. And I think one of the takeaways that the anti-Mormon party took away from the Avery kidnappings was that violence would get results. So, thank you.
So we would love to take questions if you have them, or we can linger if nobody has questions. But there's many volume editors. If there's a question I can't answer, they would be more than happy to come up and answer. So please.
What was the date range of the documents, this volume?
So it starts from August 1st of 1843 through December 31st of 1843. So it's actually a really small number of months, right? And you probably noticed if you've been collecting the Joseph Smith papers that the volumes are staying the same thickness, but the amount of time that we've covered is getting less and less,
Gotcha.
right? It's just a couple of months. And it's shocking to some degree, like how many documents are packed in here, right? Over time, there's just more and more Joseph Smith documents, right? Scribes are producing more. We have more discourses. Some of the discourses that you'll read in here have 3 or 4 versions from different people who took notes on it. So yeah, it's kind of amazing.
Are you finding any new documents, or is everything kind of stagnant, or not stagnant, but you've got pretty much everything, or you run across new stuff?
So the answer is yes and no. So we do find new documents. Jeffrey can probably tell you about one the legal document that we found a couple months ago, was it?
We'll talk about the page revelation.
Yes. So there was one revelation in this volume, right? If you go back to Documents Volume 1, it would be like primarily revelations, right? We only have one in this one, and it's a revelation that was discovered. It was in the Brigham Young collection, and it was in a letter that Brigham Young wrote, and the text of that revelation is in the letter. So, I mean, it was in our own collection at the church, right? And it hadn't been identified as a Joseph Smith document. So, yeah, it's kind of cool. Like, we find them sometimes right in our own collection, maybe not cataloged in the Joseph Smith papers themselves, but yeah, the legal one.
Yeah, so about 6 months ago, St. Louis, Missouri State Archives were going through their legal case records and cataloging files that hadn't been well documented before. And a Latter-day Saint working in that archive noticed a case involving a Joseph Smith and thought, surely this can't be our Joseph Smith. And then they went to the next page, and it was a list of testimonies submitted from Nauvoo, Illinois, signed by Hiram Smith, John Taylor, and the who's who of Latter-day Saint church leaders. And they realized this is our Joseph Smith. And so, yeah, there was an entire slew of about half dozen Joseph Smith legal documents that were just discovered 6 months ago in St. Louis. They're not in our volume, but they'll be posted on the Joseph Smith Papers website, I think in October of this year.
Yeah. So I guess the short answer to your question is yes, we do find them. Mostly we think we have a good lot of them in the Joseph Smith Papers, but yeah, I imagine we'll continue to find Joseph Smith documents. And they'll have to be posted on our website rather than print volumes at that point. Let's go back here in the back.
How do you determine which documents to include in your book, like this one or other books that you've done? I'm relatively new to the whole papers project, so
Yeah.
I'm a newbie.
So we have selection criteria that we try to be consistent with across the volumes. It has to be a Joseph Smith document, so but that can include something that he wrote himself, or it can include things that were written on his behalf by scribes. We include letters that were both written by Joseph Smith or his scribes and letters received by Joseph Smith. So if it was in his papers, we try to include it. I think the goal was to be as comprehensive as possible in the print volumes, include every Joseph Smith paper possible, but we realized that there are what we refer to as routine documents, like say an Elders Quorum license, where you might have, 1,000 Elders Quorum licenses, right, that were signed by Joseph Smith. We decided in some of those cases we don't include all of them. We take one as sort of a representative sample and include that in the volume. But in terms of the larger project online, we will include every Joseph Smith document. So every one of our documents will be posted with full transcripts, I think, right? Full transcripts and annotation to the extent we can. But you'll be able to access and see them all in living color on the website. And if you haven't been to our website, you're missing out, because it has everything in full color. So Our print volumes, largely, you're just getting transcripts of the documents, right? On the website, you can see the actual documents, and it's pretty remarkable.
I really like what I've seen on it so far, so thank you.
Yeah, and it's a great resource. We have an incredible web team that does amazing things, and now we have a legal and a business financial series that will be largely posted online, and that's going to be like earth-shattering. Honestly, I feel like the documents that are on there are just incredible, and they give us a much fuller, richer picture of Joseph Smith's life. Right? We all think about the discourses, we think about some of the letters, but the business transactions, right, took up a lot of his time. Right? The legal cases, unfortunately, took up a lot of his time and a lot of thought. So it's a great picture that we got here. Yeah, right here.
Is this 3,400 petitioners online, or?
So we don't have it posted online yet,
Okay.
but I expect it will be done. I think we were hoping for the December release. I don't know if you guys have heard anything about it. But it will be online, I would say, within the next 6 months. Yeah, and it's like 3,419 signatures.
So it was 50 feet long?
50 feet long, yeah.
Crazy.
That's I haven't actually seen the physical document to see the whole 50 feet. Chase, did you ever see the full document?
Just the images of it.
Yeah.
So, I mean, Chase can talk more about it. The way because Chase is our expert on it, but the way they do it is after the petition, they would wafer or basically glue down another sheet of paper with more names. And they had a whole process. You had messengers going to all of these outlying Latter-day Saint settlements to collect signatures. It was quite a feat.
And we have a few of these kinds of petitions in the Joseph Smith Papers and other volumes, where a group of Latter-day Saints will sign a petition and they'll send it in, right? And we did one, I think it was in Documents Volume 9, where it was a petition from the church members in Philadelphia. And that one had probably a couple hundred signatures, and we had this challenge of like, well, do we annotate every single one of those? Do we try to identify every one of these people? The handwriting is incredibly difficult with original signatures of signed by people that were not familiar with the handwriting. And in this particular one for the Philadelphia branch, a lot of the members were immigrants from Germany, and they actually wrote it in, what's it called, Elizabeth? Do you remember? Short shrift or something like that? I can't remember it's like a really specialized old version of German, and it's so hard to read, right? And so, like, I spent forever trying to decipher even what the names were, and so we elected not to annotate every single name, and we won't be able to do that with the 3,400 signatures. So what it means is that you all we'll do it crowdsourcing, and you guys can identify your ancestors and then send back and say, yeah, this is what it actually says, because it's a lot of resources to try to figure something like that out. But yeah, quite remarkable. Yes.
So after 10, 12 years, what's the feedback from the professional community and the other historians? Like, your goal was to kind of emulate the Thomas Jefferson papers.
Yeah.
And what's the feedback you're getting from other professionals? How's it going?
I would love to turn this over to one of my colleagues, Matt or Brent, or you guys want to... Could you hear the question?
You got it.
Anyone else? No? I mean, Jeffrey, you want to take your crack at this one?
Sure.
I don't want to be the only one speaking, so I'm trying to...
The volumes that have been reviewed by historians and academic journals and stuff have been pretty universally acclaimed. I know particularly, we were singing the praises of the website. That's considered a pretty state-of-the-art if you're looking at documentary editing projects. Like you mentioned, the papers of the Founding Fathers. What we've been able to do on our website is as good, if not better, and probably much better than almost any other project has been able to do. I've heard people in the doc editing community refer to our website as the gold standard of what you're looking to be able to do with documentary editing. So, in that sense, it's been really well received.
We do get criticized a little bit sometimes for providing too much annotation. Sometimes, all right. So if you go to the Founding Fathers documentary editing books, they're not as annotated, right? They might not have as much information. So sometimes we get that kind of criticism. But I honestly do think every conference I've gone to, people are like, wow, you guys. They're mostly jealous of our resources. right? I mean, the fact that we have the largest history department, I think, in the state, or pretty close to it, right, is pretty envious, right? That we have that many historians that are PhD, trained. We have credible editors. We have amazing general editors. I mean, we have a lot of great resources, so people are pretty envious of that. Yeah.
I had two related questions. I hear you're going to do the Hiram Smith papers next. How many volumes do you anticipate that will be in? The second question is, I know Scott Faldring did the Oliver Cowdery papers, and they're somewhere tied up in BYU. Maybe the 10 volumes will end up as 2 or something. I don't know if that's possible. They might get them all somehow.
Matt, do you want to field that one? I'm not aware that we are doing the Hiram Smith papers.
So, we don't currently have any plans to do the Hiram Smith papers.
Oh, okay, so I was misinformed.
Well, I know that's something that's been suggested.
Oh, okay.
People would love to do it.
There was
even publicly in a review.
Okay.
There was some BYU professors were planning to do the Hiram Smith papers several years ago, and they were talking a lot about it, and I have not heard anything about it for a long time.
And kind of the same with the Oliver Cowdery papers. I mean, it's not something that we had done as a department. You're right. I think it was this. I forget the BYU professors that were involved in that one, but
Scott Faldring was the one
Yeah.
I think was the assembled.
I don't think much has
He's
been.
passed away, so somebody
Yeah.
else is.
Richard Lloyd Anderson.
Taking
Lloyd
away.
Anderson first, and then
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
I mean, it really is. We are really blessed to have the resources that we do, and there's so many papers projects that we would love to do. I mean, I'm sure there's plenty of us that would love to do a full Brigham Young papers. Of course, that would take probably the rest of our lifetime to do
Right.
because of the amount of the volume that's in there. But Matt, did you have anything to add to that, or?
Well, I mean, I might just add that, just speaking of what we will do, may do after the Joe Smith papers, we've got 2 volumes after this one that remain to be published in the currently slated, set of
In
print
skew,
volumes.
huh?
D14, D15.
Volume 14, 15 of the document series, and the volume 15 will publish about a year from now. It'll be next June 27th. And then we, no, we won't be doing the Hiram papers,
Okay.
the Cowdery papers. We'd love to see somebody, especially I think would be interesting to see somebody pick up the torch on the Cowdery papers. That's
Yeah.
just
Mhm.
so.
I know a lot of the work's been done, but
But we do have other projects that we're currently working on that have been approved at high levels, and there's some that we've talked about publicly. The William Clayton Nauvoo Journal is one that is a really significant document that there's been a lot of historical interest in, that even some members of the same team are working on right now, and a handful of other projects that will follow.
yeah, the future is bright. There's a lot of great things
Okay.
in the. I mean, it's kind of hard to believe that Joseph Smith Papers is coming to an end, right? We knew it would. We all knew it would at some point, but yeah, there's a lot of great things coming down the pike, I think. So. Yes.
Well, on a related note, I heard that also being published, and I thought maybe by BYU Studies, but it's kind of a Joseph Smithish, maybe-ish kind of a thing. But the layman's, the parchments from really early on that came down through Hiram Smith, I heard they might be published. Any word on that, or is that just?
I've not.
Did
heard
I just
anything.
imagine that?
I've not heard anything, but you're probably asking the wrong person. See if anyone else from my colleagues know. I don't know if anyone's heard of it.
Okay.
Yeah. I don't know, maybe there's like these fun rumors, like Sword of Laban kind of things that kind of float around. But I mean,
We need to start.
they're all
somewhere.
great projects.
Well, on a related note, is that at all a Joseph Smith paper? I guess it's hard to know the provenance and the original authorship,
Right.
so it's probably kind of peripheral, I guess.
Yeah.
It'd be very interesting to see that published.
Yeah, I don't know if we would consider it a Joseph Smith document. You'd have to ask some of the people on our
And I think that would fall more under the lines of like a historical artifact more than a document that you could publish.
right.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay.
I think we need to start a rumor. I heard that you guys are going to do a project like this on gold plates.
Oh yeah, why not? That sounds fantastic. We'll just go up to the Granite Mountain vaults
Yeah,
and
I'm sure they're there.
get him up there with the Sword of Laban and.
Yeah.
I thought Richard
No.
Bushman was doing that.
Yeah, next book.
There you go. Yeah, Richard Bushman to be continued. So.
Yeah.
Can I ask, in this sort of vein, what are projects you're working on currently?
Yeah, so it's interesting. Our team is kind of dispersing in different directions. So me personally, I will be working on global history, specifically the history of missions. So that's my next project. Jeffrey?
So I'm still, this is our last volume with the Joseph Smith papers, at least mine, but I'm still working hard at the website. I'm part of the legal series, annotating and providing introductions to the legal series. I was part of the financial series, but then I married the head of the financial series, and HR said I could no longer be on the financial series.
It was a good trade-off. Best choices ever made.
And I'm currently, other than that, I'm working on the William Clayton journals.
Yeah, and
Can I just follow up on what he said? I know we said, okay, next year we'll have the last print volume of the Joseph Smith papers. But it's easy to underestimate just how much work goes into that website and how much material is there, especially the legal series and the financial series. They're huge. They were envisioned as entire series within the Joseph Smith papers. That's how they will appear on the website. But they're really significant and really big, and there's still quite a bit of work that will go on probably for the next 2 or 3 years just to get those.
And we're hoping for the financial series, excuse me, the legal series to be done by 2023, right? And financial is 2025. Yeah, so I mean that will continue to go on. So yeah, I didn't mean to imply that the project itself is done, but like the print volumes after we fin that, we'll be focusing on website stuff.
So you're
but
saying the legal is not going to be print?
it will not be a print volume. It'll be all online. Yeah.
Jeff Walker sign off on that?
I don't think he's affiliated with the project, so I don't know if he had to sign off on that one. So I don't know that. I don't know the details of that. But Brent is moving on to Brigham Young.
Brigham Young, John Taylor.
Brigham Young and John Taylor.
Sermons or journals or what?
John Taylor is Discourses, and Brigham is Letters.
Yeah, it'll be a 1 volume for the Brigham Young letters, correct? Yeah.
But a larger project that could spin, there could be a lot that could come out of it, but we've got a volume contemplated now. And the Taylor sermons, I'm sorry, I'm just jumping in, but the Taylor sermons are from shorthand accounts, so a lot of material that's just not ever really been heard since it was spoken.
Right. And Chase is continuing to work on, he's going to be working on D15, so stay tuned for that. He'll come back and he'll tell you all about the martyrdom, so. Yes?
I know a decision was made not to include the Joseph Smith translation of the Bible in the print volumes, but how much information is there online? I know Kent Jackson has put 2 new volumes out on that. But.
So, go ahead, Matt.
I can take that. So,
do you want to come up front so we can see your beautiful
really.
face?
I'm sitting right next to
Okay,
that.
okay.
Unless you can't.
Whisper softly then.
So that the way we're envisioning that right now is a web publication, but it's so significant that what we would like to do, what we're intending to do is give it the same level of treatment that we would in a print volume in terms of annotation and introductory material. And then at some point in the future we may decide to make a different decision about print, but for now it's intended for the web.
Okay.
But with a kind of a full kind of treatment.
Right now right now there's a transcript of the Joseph Smith translation of the Bible, all the different manuscripts on our website. But it's I think it's Fallring's old transcript, and we're hoping to, with better images and better access to the manuscripts, to create our own new transcript.
We're in the process.
We're in the process of that, yeah.
So that big black volume would be kind of the beginning of that project.
Yeah.
Yeah, great question. Any other questions inquiring minds want to know?
Well, you've done a couple of other well, I don't know if you guys, but somebody there's done the George Buchanan journals and the Relief Society stuff. Do you have any, and they're kind of, anything else like that in the works? Or have we already kind of discussed that?
No, I mean, Matt
Well,
wants to come up really badly up here.
Sorry.
I mean,
You're making
Sorry,
me feel
Director of
guilty.
Publications, he can answer this the best.
Well, look. And also cause some damage along the way. Sorry.
So it's a great series of digital journals, and so for those of you who haven't seen it on the Church Historians Press website, George Buchanan's journals, Emmeline Wells' journals, which will be complete as of I think October or November of this year. So we'll finish those, both very voluminous. Another large journal, George F. Richards.
Oh.
And so that one's underway, but it's again a very large project, and it's going to take some time for us to get it all published. And we envision that website as a really great resource for scholars and interested parties to study kind of the period of church history between the end of Joseph Smith's life, which we're covering so well with the Joseph Smith papers, and then and kind of the probably the 1920s, so this kind of period of transition. And so in addition to those journals, we've looked at other journals, both produced by significant and prominent church members, like the ones we've already started to publish, and some others that give you a little bit more texture about kind of the lived religion of Latter-day Saints who are not church leaders. And so we've got a handful of other smaller journals that we envision as a part of that series. We're hoping to not only continue to add to that series, but improve the research tools and the search on it, so that you can, that it becomes a really great resource to look at some particular event or issue during that time frame. But do it all digitally. Does that make sense?
Yep.
And I didn't give away anything there. I know that's probably not very interesting. You wanted to hear names and journals and documents.
I didn't know about George F. Richards, so it's...
Yeah, that's an exciting one. That's a really, really interesting journal. We've looked at a number of them. There are some, Belle Harris is a woman who was in the state penitentiary in the 1880s for refusing to testify against her husband in a plural marriage case. She's in the penitentiary with her young child, and she keeps a journal of that experience. It's a really, really interesting journal. We've got a journal by one of the first single women to serve a full-time mission. Again, during the same time period, but providing different perspectives on some things. So anyway, those are a few things that we've contemplated.
Very nice.
and you've got the Elizar Snow Discourses project.
Oh, yes. That's all. So all of our projects we're trying to get published digitally, of course, whether they have a print component or not. And I'm glad you mentioned that. So we've gone through, and Elizabeth has been a part of this effort, but we've gone through every Relief Society, YLMIA, and Primary Minute Book, and a whole bunch of other materials in our collections to identify accounts of sermons by Elizar Snow. And we're publishing them comprehensively in a digital form on the same website, same time period, different kind of documents. But then we're working as well on a single volume of selected discourses of Elizar Snow. That's, I think, a really significant contribution to women's history. So an aspect of her ministry that not as many, it hasn't been published on in the same way.
Are you working with the Wilford Woodruff project at all, or is that kind of totally on its own?
I should sit down now. We have individuals on this. It's kind of on its own. It has its own funding, its own team. Great project, and yet we've talked with them. We've worked with them closely. We have members of our team who have advised them and are on their board. I'm looking at Brent, but I'm trying to remember who's on which board, because you've got a couple of papers projects like this. So you've got Wilford Woodruff, you have the Brigham Young Center working on Brigham Young's documents, and in both cases, again, independent projects, not affiliated with the department, but great feelings of collegiality, and then we have the opportunity to advise them just because of the experience and that we've built over time with the Joseph.
I don't know how extensive the papers of Emma Smith would be, but I just wondering if there's any assembly of those that would be available somewhere.
Seeing what do you think?
All of our questions.
Tough question.
There's not many.
Yeah, there's
Just
not a lot,
Yeah.
but there's some good stuff.
Joseph probably burned them.
Emma might have burned.
Brandon might have.
All right. Well, thank you very much for coming. What a treasure trove of information here, right? These guys gave us all sorts of great information about this project and future projects. And for me as a bookseller and as a student of history, I'm really excited about the future because of all this stuff.